I wonder if I can ask Nick Hammond to come forward now and just talk about the Spring Sheep Dairy PGP, and then after that I'll ask Natalie if she would be prepared to close the conference for us.
Hello everyone. Looking around the room, there's a lot of really familiar faces. I actually was sort of reflecting on what I'd talk about this afternoon. Craig asked me to talk about the future of the industry, and I was quite conscious of actually spoken to a lot of you about the PGP side very recently. We've got a farm open day coming up in a few months. So I actually sort of thought at the end of a very long and fantastic conference, I'd actually sort of take a bit of a macro view. We've had, I'm speaker number 43, so we've had a whole lot of detail all the way through the last couple of days, and I sort of thought I'd go right up above and sort of take a bit of a macro view of the industry. So the industry's actually been around for quite a long time. I picked up this book recently called Practical Sheep Dairying, fantastic buying at £5 in London. And it was actually written in 1982. And this is Ken Genty, if any of you know Ken. He doesn't look a lot like that now. He has a lot less hair, among other things. But what it reminded me of was that this industry's been trying to get off the ground for a very long time. And that hasn't actually come to fruition for a number of sort of limiting factors. But when I sort of think about it and reflect on the last couple of days, I think we're at this really interesting tipping point where we can really make it come to life. And I guess when you sort of take a global view of sheep milking, I don't think we're crazy. There's huge sheep milking industries globally. People talk about it being less than 2% of global milk production. That's actually huge. What's quite interesting here is you see the very strong Mediterranean dominance. There's actually a huge amount of production coming from China. Sadly, this data doesn't include anything on New Zealand, which is something we need to change. But when we sort of think about what kind of model the New Zealand industry needs to look like, I think we need to sort of categorise between subsistence-orientated sheep milking and the really high-value sheep milking operations globally. We had a great speaker today from France, so thank you, Agmar and Milk, for bringing him to New Zealand. Further to that model, the Roquefort cheese model has been really well developed over a really long time. This is one of their farms that we took a photo of driving down the road there. They've got a really refined farming model as well as a really refined genetic line. They've also got a pretty impressive setup. This is a shot of inside the caves of Roquefort. They've got an amazing story where they use the airflows of the caves to regulate the cheese process, and they end up with a very fantastic product at a pretty premium price position. So when we think about what the New Zealand industry needs to be, I think we can take a lot of learnings from these well-developed industries globally. It was quite interesting, the fax machine never really took off in Africa. They went straight to the iPhone. And I think as an industry, we don't need to reinvent the wheel in a lot of places. We need to look at what's been done globally really well and take those learnings back to New Zealand. And so it's great to see consistently experts from a global perspective coming to New Zealand to discuss it. And I guess when you sort of look at New Zealand, it makes so much sense that we're good at sheep milking. I mean, we're one of the best dairy nations in the world. We're fantastic at cows. We're fantastic at making high quality ingredients for exporting all over the world. And as a country, we factor in the top few for dairy exporting. And then when you look at the sheep, people go, oh, you guys have so many sheep. I mean, it shouldn't be that hard, you know? Just go out and milk your sheep, no problem. And as we all know, there's some huge barriers to that actually coming to life. When you look at a lot of the sort of discussions around the industry, it all seems so easy. And it is actually really, really easy when you look at it from this perspective. I'm not being critical of any of these groups. There's a lot of good commentary, but it's actually not that hard theoretically to build a billion-dollar industry. All you need to actually do is open Excel. And if you just chuck sheep numbers in there, we'll start with 12,000. Give it a breeding rate of 180%, sure. Milk per ewe, 300 litres, I'm sure you can find a data point for that. And then you go, I'm not saying anything aloud on this one, just $3, sure. Pretty easy to defend. And you go, oh, we're already at 11 mil. Then all you actually need to do to build a billion-dollar industry is just drag all these down and done. So it's... So we're about 8 years away. I guess when you're sort of living on the coalface of this, it all seems really, really easy from the outside. No, I factored that in. If you look at my formula, anyway. Yeah, they are. Actually, John Hepburn's trying to change that. So when I sort of look at what we need as an industry and sort of take a bit of a step back from all the fantastic expertise that's been presented over the last couple of days, I've sort of tried to think about what are some of the really critical aspects we need to get right. One is about building a category. backing up claims we make nutritionally, executing products, it's always a bit of a given, and ingredient supply. And I say ingredient supply rather than farming because it's a whole sort of mindset about what we need to do at the farming level. So building a category, we have a lot of discussion around how do we get to this point here? How do we get to a product on a shelf? But when you're actually living and breathing it, this is your battlefield. This is where 90% of your fears and work and late nights come from, is how do I actually get someone to take a sheep milk product off the shelf? Because we've got some amazing attributes, some amazing things that we can build up, an amazing story to tell. But unless you're sitting right next to a consumer, when they turn up at their pharmacy or supermarket and look at this line of shelves, what's going to make them walk up and pay double or triple the amount for the New Zealand sheep milk product on there? And that is a huge challenge if we want to keep scaling this industry. And so we're doing a huge amount of work in this phase. You've heard from Scotty already. It's actually quite lucky, fortuitous, that we actually had him in New Zealand. Our head of market insights is not in New Zealand. She's in Asia somewhere. It's hard to keep track. Scotty's just come back from the Middle East. He's off to Asia again over the weekend. He's living and breathing those markets, especially this time of the year. But we really need to understand, why does someone want to buy a sheep milk product? Like, what is the emotional reason that they need to buy it? What do our products need to be to actually appeal to that properly? And this sort of leads me into one of the next areas, is around the science. As an industry, we actually have a huge advantage coming back to this. To actually build this, it would be so much better if there were 3 New Zealand sheep milk products on this aisle, all telling a really, really compelling story. And when you sort of come to market shaping, you want to be consistent in a lot of the fundamentals of why someone should buy a product. And so this is where I come to the sort of claims aspect. Now, claims is something that has been a bit of a softer area over the last few years, but is changing dramatically. So it used to be you could sort of get away with saying a little bit, but in every single market we're seeing, what people can claim about a product is getting tightened up significantly. And if as an industry we're not ahead of that, it'll come and bite us. And so at the moment there's a huge amount of, and we're guilty of it as well, there's a huge amount of varying claims around what sheep milk does, with often quite scratchy science behind it. Now, we've heard some fantastic work from the scientists over the last couple of days about getting that initial bit of validation around sheep milk. But what we need to do as an industry is tell a very consistent story around that. So we're doing a bit of work in that space, which we'd hope that the rest of the industry steals from us and says the same story. But this is also something we need to think about going forwards. What do we need as an industry to really establish ourselves in that high-end nutrition space, which seems to be where most of the party is starting to head to now? Executing products. Now, this seems to be a bit of a given that, oh yeah, I've seen some guy with cow or goat milk make it. It won't be a problem. Just make it with sheep milk and you're done. It's really not the case. There's so many little things, so many rakes in the grass with making a product out of sheep milk. It's a beautiful thing to work with. A lot of the cheese makers and people working with it as a luxury product find it absolutely fantastic. But there's so many challenges there that we don't even know about yet when it comes to making sheep milk products. It was great to hear the Blue River Dairy guys speak yesterday and provide us with such a honest and sort of brave view of their journey through this. But nothing's a given. We have a bit of a mantra at Spring Sheep that the only similarity with cow's milk is it's a kind of a white liquid. Other than that, everything else is an assumption. And we've been bitten on that many times. We've had a production run go through pretty well, and then something we've never heard about has suddenly stuck to something I didn't know existed, and as a result... So we've started to do a lot of work in this space around new product development. We've got a huge amount of way to go to really start cracking some completely new format areas. We're finding it incredibly challenging. There's a lot of work to be done in this space, but we'll keep you posted on that one. Ingredient supply. Now, please don't take that as any kind of insult on the farming side. It's more that it's a bit of a given in a lot of industries that when you're making a product, you have a pretty consistent base, that it's always the same quality, that it's easy to use. So if you're, say, for sake of argument, making a formula powder using cow's milk, you go to Fonterra, you get pretty much perfect powder. It'll have all the market compliance stuff done, and you're away. So when I talk about ingredient supply, I mean really about how do we create a usable, high-value source of milk that's scalable at the farm level. And there's a lot of aspects to that. Genetics has been spoken about really effectively and extensively over the last couple of days. It's not going to be a silver bullet, not at scale anyway. There's some fantastic genetics in New Zealand for small scale. I hope that anyone interested at doing small scale is turning up to the King's Meat Auction tomorrow. But for doing this at large scale, we're finding that those genetics don't perform the same. So there's a bit of a small flock, large flock factor in there. And where we have seen large flock genetics work has been overseas. but we're still a few years away from that. The first cross hoggets that we'll have with European genetics in them are still 2 years away. So we're really early stage on that journey, and when you see some of the development of the French models, they took a little while to come up that. So we've got a lot of work to do on the genetics side, but it can't be done in isolation. Our farming systems need a really strong review. We're taking sheep from completely the other side of the planet and just plonk them in New Zealand and expecting them to do pretty similar results. And I think agriculture is never that easy on you. There'll be something that comes up. And so our focus over the next couple of years before these European genetics come through is about trying to find a farming system that works in a New Zealand context. Peter spoke about it really well today, so we're on the same page on that one. I'm not going to repeat what he sort of already discussed, but that's definitely one of the key focuses for us. So this season is really about feeding sheep and really analysing that critically. Blueprint model. So one of the challenging things in this industry is if we want to have scalability, we've got to prove the farming model works for a New Zealand farmer. And to do that, that conversation needs to be, how much are you going to pay me, how much do you think it will cost me to produce it, and how much capital do I need? And I don't think there's anyone in New Zealand that can answer those three questions with a straight face and promise that same result over a 10-year period, which in my view you need if you're going to put in a few $1 million of equipment on your farm. So there's a huge amount of work to do on that side. It's really awesome to have Maui Milk on that same journey with us because we are so in tune with what we're doing, but we're doing things completely differently. And that's probably one of the most powerful things you can have in an industry like this. We've got different minds attacking the same problem in a different way and sharing really collaboratively. Milk quality, there's a huge amount to this. It seems like a bit of a given, and it probably is in cow milk. In sheep, our size fights us the whole way. If anything goes wrong in our farm, there's no dilution factor. It goes straight into a can, which has to cross a border. Now, if you're in a cow dairy operation and you stuff something up, it gets diluted with millions of litres and gets picked up all the way through and blended and blended and blended, and it sort of makes its way away. But in our operation, if we have someone just chuck a cup on accidentally on a sheep that might have had antibiotics, you're done. You've got to go right through a process with MPI, you've got to test all the milk. It's just insane, or you have to throw the milk out. We're so exposed in these small stages about milk quality. Then that's not even really getting into the other aspects around keeping it cool, getting all the systems right. There's so many little learnings along the way there, and a lot of the discussion around the genetics was around somatic cells. What do we actually need for the products we're making in New Zealand? What do we need from a nutritional perspective for the products we're making? What decisions do we need to make on the genetic side in terms of, say, protein and fat ratios? What do we need to favour? There's so many unknowns in that sort of part of the business which we need to work through. R&D. Now, as sort of Thomas alluded to, R&D is quite easy. You just write out a one-page sort of submission about what you want to have done, and then it all just happens. My farm team would, Joe, sorry. It's a phenomenal amount of work to do an R&D program while running a large-scale commercial site. But for us, we're finding that small scale does not translate to large scale in almost anything we do. So if we actually need to know the answer to something, we've got to do it with a lot of views. So the program this year was 2,000 sheep. And it's pretty easy to go, well, we'd need to, say, weigh them 4 times. And suddenly you're weighing 2,000 sheep 4 times, that's 8,000 sheep. That's a huge amount of sheep to move around. And so when you've got a team already doing 10-hour days, to then ask them to do that on top is insane. And we found that with our lamb rearing. We've got a very passionate woman who runs our lamb rearing program, and the only time she had to do the weighing was on her day off. So the passion there is amazing. But it can't be understated how much R&D work needs to go into this industry to really give us that credible understanding of sheep milking in a New Zealand context. Training. One of the interesting things which I've mentioned a few times is we're basically cheated on the farm manager side. We imported John Ryrie, who was sponsored by Agmart a couple of years back, and he's been fantastic. He's still obviously adapting to a New Zealand environment for farming. But we're basically sort of cheated on that one. And so the question is, where do we get this talent from to manage these farms? And we sort of talk, how many farms do you want to have in the next sort of couple of decades? And you go, well, for every one of those farms, you need a really, really capable person who doesn't exist in New Zealand. And the ones that do exist globally, most of them speak French, which based on today, I don't think many of us do. So we've got a lot of work to do there to actually build that talent and that succession coming through. And the only way to do that is to get these guys onto farms, underneath guys who know what they're doing, and get them training in a bit of a formal way, and get them moving through and seeing progression within the industry. So there's a lot to do on that side as well. And then resources is one we'll, next time we catch up in a year's time, we'll talk about a bit more. Over the last couple of days, we've had so many amazing bits of information. Everyone's sort of scribbling down these little notes. And so the whole industry is going to end up with all these little notes spread across the whole country. about these little gems. So one of the things Spring Sheep's doing over the next year is making an open resource for the industry, where we take a lot of those gems and put them into a place in a resource where everyone can actually use them, and try and distill them down into quite practical, applicable learnings. That's going to take us a few years to do. We're sort of going to do that incrementally in an online forum, and then hopefully in a few years' time we can actually get that to a more formal technical manual. But really just trying to take all these little awesome bits of information, all these silos, and put them into one place where we can all start building it together. So that leaves us with quite a full table, quite frankly. And there's really no easy way to go about it. There's a huge amount of spinning plates in the air to get this industry to go from where it is now to like an industry we can all be really proud of in 20, 30 years' time. And the only way to do that is divide it up. So at this moment, I'd just like to acknowledge all of the, we sort of have like basically an AA-style group of sheep milkers around New Zealand where we all come and share our thoughts. Hi, I'm Nick, and I've been milking sheep for 2 years. And so I'd start off by sort of acknowledging a few other guys in the industry, Maui Milk especially, who we work really closely with and really value that collaborative relationship. Blue River Dairy, it's great to see you guys up here and sort of talking about your experiences. There's a huge amount of learnings in there which we hope we can work together on. Kingsmead, Miles and Janet, aren't they just lovely people? They've done an amazing bit of work over a really long time, and especially at that smaller end of the industry, everyone's really starting to benefit from that in a big way. And I mean, we wouldn't really be able to get any milk out of a sheep. We've got a lot of dairy meat in our flock as well. And it's just great to see this sort of growing in the industry, this really great culture of let's all be pretty open, warts and all, what can we do to move forwards as a group. I'd like to acknowledge MPI for supporting the industry with the PGP. It's a huge bit of weaponry for the industry. It's something that a lot of other industries have had. It was a mission to get it all together, but I'm really grateful to the MPI team for working so closely with us. And I'll have you know that a few of those MPI guys aren't bad milking a sheep as well. It's a rite of passage before we're even allowed to start discussions. You've got to have milked a sheep. MB and the science community. I think everyone sort of picked up on the huge amount of passion there is within the scientific community for sheep milking. And today's that you only get a snapshot of what everyone's done. A lot of what that comes back to is just a huge amount of grinding hours. So one of the guys said, I got 9 hours of footage of lambs chewing bark. That's not a great day. Like sitting there counting out every time a lamb drinks bark, and God, I'd hate to think about the urination guys like just following sheep around all day. How's your day, honey? Pretty crap. Agmart, you guys have been a consistent support to the industry for a few years now. You brought John Rari over. You've brought consistently high quality speakers to New Zealand, and every time you do that, you add to the collective knowledge of the New Zealand sheep milking industry. So thanks for your ongoing support there. And to all our suppliers, we're not an easy industry to work with in the early stages. There's so many things that we sort of have to learn with our suppliers. So I'm not going to list them all out or I'll forget someone, but you know who you are, and thank you so much for the early starts and late nights you're putting into getting your technology to work in a sheep milking context. We're really benefiting from it, and I promise we'll be $1 billion industry and it all makes sense for you guys later. And to my own farm team, you guys just go above and beyond constantly. Not just a farm team, but the whole way through. There's really no easy way to do this, and most of the time it comes down to just sheer huge amount of hours. I'd hate to see the body condition scoring on most of the people entering the industry because it goes downhill pretty rapidly. Lots of early mornings, late nights, really average economy flights to random parts of the world. So thanks to all my team for the work you've done over the last year. This is one that I always just keep in my deck, building sustainability. It's quite easy to see a lot of the rhetoric and momentum as it's easy to assume that makes it an easy industry to get into. It's not. What we sort of tend to see, what we've seen in these other industries, is an initial bit of oversupply versus demand. As you sort of saw from my spreadsheet, it's really easy to keep growing supply. Demand doesn't necessarily grow like that. It takes quite a while. It takes lots of markets. It gets held up by market entry. It gets held up by all sorts of things, processing constraints. Everything sort of factors into that. And in reality, when you look at most of the demand curves, unless you're selling a Tickle Me Elmo, they're pretty straight. And so I guess what we need to make sure is that our supply follows that line. Because what we've seen in a lot of industries is an initial bit of more demand than supply. Supply takes a couple of years to kick in, it kicks in too hard, and then a whole lot of guys lose out, and then it takes a while for the industry to recover. I'd love to be one of those New Zealand industries where we actually got this right the whole time. a lot of people ask me, why won't you come pick up my milk? And it's because I don't have a case that I could sleep at night to give you guys to say, look, I'm going to be able to pay you that money you need for a long enough period to make this work for you. I want you to just give me a bit of time, give us all a few years to get a few things in line, and then when we come to you, we can come to you with a really compelling and validated case for why you should actually milk sheep. And so for the moment, I tell you what, we'd do a lot better if we just took everyone's milk tomorrow, but we could do a lot worse in 2 years if we oversupply. So there's a lot of work to do within the whole industry to really get those two curves aligned. That said, if you are looking at going sheep milking, and look, Nick be damned, I'm doing it, doors always open. Come and drop me an email, drop Thomas an email, and come and we can run through the business case, and we'll do it with a pretty open kimono as to what the challenges are. So if you still want to go into it after that, go for it. We can't stop you, but always feel free to come and tap us on the shoulder and have a pretty open conversation about it. So look, thank you to everyone for organising this. Craig, Linda, this is amazing. Craig, for a man with, is it 6 milking sheep now? You've got a pretty big passion for the industry, mate. And it's times like this, I've had so many conversations. I haven't been able to take 2 steps the last 2 days. I've had so many amazing conversations, and as an industry, this thing is absolutely critical for us to start sharing information, sharing thoughts, making connections, and having great conversations. So thank you so much, Craig. And you're great on the guitar, mate. Didn't know you had it in you. Cool. So that's me, guys. As I said, looking forward to seeing you all, on as many of you as possible on the farm and our next Farm Open Day, which we'll communicate through Craig's group. But keep at it. There's a huge amount of work to do, but there's a really amazing thing at the end of it. So hang in there.